So I'm here with Reid Hoffman, who actually we first met a long time ago, back when Khan Academy was operating out of a walk-in closet. But you know, the whole point of doing these things, I think it's interesting for our team here and for just the audience at home, or the people who are just users of Khan Academy, is just to really understand how someone becomes a Reid Hoffman. And so if we rewind back, you know, to your childhood, you know, what were you like at, I don't know, 11, 12, 13 years old? Did you think you were going to do what you have done?
Actually, I'm not even sure that I really knew what being an entrepreneur or venture capitalist was. I'm not sure either of those items of language. I think I probably could have passed a word test on entrepreneur, perhaps. When I was around those ages, I was actually pretty unconvinced about, I hadn't really thought about what life after school was, and I wasn't really sure what the value of school was. So around the age of 9, this will date me because I doubt that most of the folks here will actually know what this is, but did you ever play Dungeons and Dragons?
I did.
Right, so I was obsessed with Dungeons and Dragons. I would basically spend every waking hour. And part of what I did is there was a particular variant of this called RuneQuest, which was the company that did it was a company called the Chaosium and was in Berkeley. And I found that that a friend of mine could introduce me to them. So I used to actually like.
And you grew up in Berkeley.
I grew up in Berkeley, yes. And so I actually spent most of my afternoons going down to this gaming company. And actually, my dad ended up thinking it wasn't such a terrible idea when they started employing me to do editing of the scenario packs and other kinds of things. He's like, okay, maybe that isn't just a crazy thing to be doing. And then, you know, probably around the age of 12, I started, maybe it was 12 to 13, I started realizing that after high school, I would be responsible for myself. And I needed to start thinking about like what life after high school was going to be. And that's when I started actually focusing on what school was, what learning was, what you could do in terms of life. It wasn't until I got to all the way to college where I started having concrete thoughts about what I would be doing. And even then I pivoted a lot.
And so when you had that realization at, I guess, you know, early adolescence, you're age 12 or so, I mean, did you become kind of like a serious student at that point, or you just kind of took school a little bit more seriously? What was the...
Well, so what my thinking then was, so I was a terrible student through basically the end of 7th grade. I got an F in French because basically the teacher was so boring and the thing was so irrelevant that I would read science fiction books through class the entire time.
In English?
In English, yes. In French, I would probably be a little bit better.
That'd be impressive.
Yes. And when I answered every question for a year in that class, je ne sais pas. Right. And just kept reading. And the teacher thought it was really funny that I had to be asked to be stopped reading. I was like, you're the first student I've ever had to ask to stop reading. And I'm like, okay. But then what happened is my father hired a tutor for me because he was worried about me. And the principal function, Fritz Bloom was a really good guy, good tutor, but its principal function was actually getting me to wake up to, wait a minute, I should be choiceful about what I'm doing. Like what is my plan? When I get out of high school, what am I planning on doing? And at the time, the only thing that could occur to me is like, well, most people who lead interesting lives from back then, and this is obviously not 100% true at all, but you know, kind of kid thing about it, go to college. So I should go to college. Well, what kind of college I could do? I should have options. I should at least be able to go to a good one. That'll mean I need to do well in high school, which means I need to start doing well at academics now. And in 8th grade, I basically shifted entirely to now doing like I only did Dungeons and Dragons after I finished my studies. Right? And it was kind of like study, Dungeons and Dragons, and that was it. Went to a school called the College Preparatory School, which was for first year in high school, which is a private school on the border between Oakland and Berkeley. And my whole family was a very strong social and political proponents of public schools, so it was a big battle. And the way that I got my father to send me to the college preparatory school was I would, every week when there was a bad story about Berkeley High, gang violence, drugs, anything else, anything, I'd clip it out and leave it for my father, right, on the dining room table as part of a campaign to say, no, you should send me to the college preparatory school.
And why did you want to go there so bad?
Well, because I'd made a decision that I actually had to do well at academics. I knew that I was better off in smaller environments. I'm not one of those folks who thrives in a survey class of 500 people and so forth. That actually a close interaction and discussion is the kind of thing that actually I learn faster, I pay more attention, it stimulates me more. I think I'm also a little bit more of an auditory than visual learner in kind of the same similar bucket. I do read, but I read slowly because I kind of want to understand each page really carefully, and some people read very fast. I tend to be more of a very careful reader. So I knew I wanted to go to a kind of a school that was focused on academics, it was small classrooms, and the college preparatory school was the closest thing I could find to that. Now then later, what happened is I realized that I also wanted to get independence. I got the independence bug early, so I applied for and got into a boarding school in Vermont called the Putney School without either of my parents knowing, because I was like, well, I'd like to do the small course classroom, but I'd like to do it somewhere thousands of miles away from the Bay Area. And Vermont struck me as the kind of safest place to do it. Plus the Putney School had, like I did blacksmithing and I did woodworking and I've driven oxen through the woods and,
Wow.
and I did all these other things. And so I had a very broad range of experience that I was also very interested in. And so that's kind of the sequence, but it was all kind of a build up to, I'm gonna figure out who I'm gonna be once I get to college.
And then did that happen? You go to college, you go to Stanford, so you must have been a good student or an excellent student, so you did get your act together, a little bit less Dungeons and Dragons.
Yes. Well, actually, on the Dungeons and Dragons thing, I stopped cold turkey when I went to my first year in high school, freshman year. But then at the Putney School, a close friend of mine, a guy named Reid was smoking. And so what I did, this very last set of Dungeons and Dragons-like game that I played is I said, look, if you can stop smoking for 6 months, I will actually be a game master and with the friends you select and so forth, I will run you through a essentially adventure scenario.
So you told him, if you give up your addiction, I will re-immerse myself in mine.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I just
that's usually a good trade.
Okay.
Yes.
Yes.
And so I did this game called Aftermath, which was a fantasy role-playing variant that was after, like, there's a nuclear holocaust and all the rest of this, because that was what he chose and what we did, and so we did that. But it's the primary thing that I knew is that I liked ideas and I wanted to be involved in kind of thinking about what it was to be a human being and what it was that we are all in a society together. And when I was going to college, I knew that would be what was interesting to me. And so I came back here actually to Stanford for 2 reasons. The first one was they had a program called Structured Liberal Education, which was this kind of what was then called Western culture. I think it's now called world civilization or something, which was kind of this intensive program about, you did philosophy and history and art and psychology and sociology and kind of the history from the pre-Greek, ancient Greek, through modern life and kind of what is the broad swath of human civilization. And I loved that program. So I was like, okay, that's really interesting. And then the second thing is I also felt it was time to come back to the Bay Area because I had been gone for 3 years and now to kind of rebuild connections in the local area.
And it was in college, and even in college, it wasn't complete. Like, you weren't dreaming of tech entrepreneurship, and I mean, you have kind of a bit of an academic inside of you.
So I got to college, basically, by the way, and you should never be too determined about what you're going to be. Your life plans change as you go, and they're even changing now, right? So to think that you know everything that you're going to want to be in 10 years means you're not going to be learning between now and 10 years from now. So you've always got to anticipate that not only will the world change and the environment around you change, but you will change as well. And so I got to college and I was like, okay, what do I want to do when I grow up? Now, of course, by the way, one part of that answer is never grow up. But I was like, what do I want to do when I grow up? And I was like, well, what I decided, and I'm still largely on this plan, although in a very different way than I ever imagined, was essentially be a public intellectual. And what a public intellectual is not someone who quotes fancy authors and so forth. It's someone who participates in the public discussion about who are we and who should we be as individuals and as a society. Like, what are our identities and what should we be evolving our identities to? And I thought that I would do that by being an academic. So I said, well, people at college, they spend a lot of time talking about this. I could participate in that, and then I could write for the Atlantic and the New York Review of Books, and this would be a good life. And so that's essentially the plan that I started, at Stanford. And then one piece of wisdom that I had when I look back, I was like, oh, that was smart, but I didn't realize it was smart when I was doing it. I was just kind of doing it, not realizing it was smart. Because I said, how certain am I about this plan? And I was like, well, I don't know. Like, I think it's right, but I'm not sure. So how do I test it? And so I was like, well, if I got a Marshall Scholarship and I went to Oxford, I could try being a graduate student. I could try being an academic and see if it was the thing that I wanted to be. Within 3 months of being at Oxford, I was like, I do not want to be an academic, right? No question. And the reason for me was that the modern practice of humanities academics tends to be so narrow that it's what I think of as, it's very scholarly, but it's also very scholastic. And almost by definition, if you write a book that more than 50 people want to read, you're actually not being professional, right?
You're a sellout.
Yeah.
60 people read it.
Yes, yes, exactly. And so it was like, no, but I want to actually talk at the public discourse at a larger. I appreciate scholarship. I appreciate a lot of what the folks do, but it's not what I want to do. And so I spent a year scratching my head, going, I don't know what I want to do when I grow up. And what I realized was, by having come to Stanford, I realized there was this thing called software entrepreneurship, or creation of software. And what I said is, well, if you look at public intellectuals and you say, what do? They write essays and books. Well, what if it's creation of a different kind of media? Because essays and books are media, but so is software. And what if I could create software that would have a similar kind of public intellectual, impact? Maybe I should go create software.
And were you already kind of immersed in the software world a little bit, or were you programming from when you were young, or were you?
No, well, I'd gotten a computer pretty early, and I'd played with it because I was intrigued by it. And my major at Stanford was a major called symbolic systems, which is kind of cognitive science and artificial intelligence. And so I'd done some programming, but I'd never done any commercial programming. I'd never written a program, to sell, or I'd never, like, it'd always been academic, like write a simulation or complete a problem set.
Yeah.
But it was kind of like, maybe that will work. And so I came back here, and it was the very first time in '93, the very first time that I actually hadn't planned out the next step. I had an idea of a direction, an idea of a place, but I literally was like, okay, I think I'm going to do that, but I don't know. And so I moved back here, moved into my dad's apartment. I was very grateful that he would say, okay, fine, I'll put you up. And then after about 3 weeks, he was like, okay, so when are you going to go get a job? And I'm like, well, I'm researching. And he's like, no, go get a job. And so I was like, all right. And again, probably it turns out being very lucky, but I thought, okay, how could I find the most interesting work that I could do? It was like, well, let me call all my friends and ask them what they know. And
I see some foreshadowing of what you will do in the future.
Yes,
but
yes, exactly. Yes, that is a definite foreshadow. But basically, this is what I did, and I explained, look, I want to work in software. I want to construct things that I think millions of people might use. I want it to be helpful to how they navigate their lives in the right way. What would be an interesting company to go work at? What would be an interesting project to work at? And I see this whole online revolution happening.
This is 1994, 93?
This is 93.
93, yeah.
Right,
So
going into 94.
The internet is not really there yet,
I'd played with the internet at college, but the internet hadn't hit the business scene.
Yes.
Right. Netscape had just recently started, but it wasn't. It was only the kind of the entrepreneurial edge,
right.
like main companies. This was this many people in this room won't know what these names mean. Prodigy, CompuServe, AOL still rings.
Yes.
Right. And so I ended up getting a job at Apple Computer because they were doing this thing called eWorld, and it was like, well, you should do these online services, and Apple Computer is a good company, and you should go work there, and you'll learn interesting product development skills there. And so I was like, great, and I went and did that. And a friend of mine, Jesse Ellenbogen, was working there. And he's like, look, if you're willing to do the contract to hire thing, we have some work that we could see if it would work out, and you can come and work hard on that. And that was an intense learning experience because, among other things, since I'd been more directed by the ultimate outcomes, like one of the things I remembered from my very first day on the job there, they said, okay, you need to create some mock-ups of some user experience, some images of how the user experience will work on these projects. And I was like, okay, how do you do that? And they're like, well, you use Photoshop. I'm like, okay, how do you do that? And they're like, oh, okay, here's a program, here's the book, here are 3 people who can ask. You'd better be functional in this in a couple of days. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then you taught yourself Photoshop very fast.
Yeah, and and this was, this was back in 93, 94, and this was kind of the early kind of the social network idea, and then your next couple of roles were still kind of exploring that space.
Yes, well, I've always been, I think this is one of the things that's true of many entrepreneurs, and I actually still, by this point, wouldn't have ever even dreamed that the word entrepreneur applied to me, was that they have some vision for how technology or a product or the way the world can be a problem to solve. And for me, it was this question of how are we better as individuals and as a society? How do we have that conversation? How do we move forward? And so all of the social dynamics of what is called, online or online systems, like for example, what is your identity? How do you post pictures? How do you find other people? How do you communicate with them? How do you work with them? All of these things were kind of key. And so I knew that's what I wanted to be doing, and I wanted to be pulling up experience. Now, one of the things that I did that I actually think was pretty helpful is pretty soon into my time at Apple, I realized that I was unlikely to be happy working on a product that it would be random luck if I found a product that someone else had constructed that I wanted to work on. It was possible, but it was really kind of rolling the dice and seeing. And I was like, well, but if I started the product myself, I had a much higher likelihood of being there. And it wasn't so much I had to own it as much as it had to be a project that I thought this would have the right kind of characteristics. And so I wrote out a very long list of skills. I said, what are all the skills that I would need in order to start a product? And then I started volunteering for projects that would allow me to play those skills. So I would literally, there was all kinds of different work at Apple, and then later Fujitsu, that they would say, well, we need someone to do X. And I was like, I'll do that, because I would look at that and I go, oh, actually, the skills of doing that work are something that I figure I wanted to pick up.
That's really interesting, because I don't know a lot of people who do what you just described, but it sounds extremely powerful. I mean, I'm guessing a lot of the things on the list are things that you might have even cringed at, that weren't in your comfort zone.
Oh yeah, for sure. Because it was an exhaustive, the way I did it is I went and talked to a bunch of smart people. For example, some of my mentors at Apple were, Jonathan Rosenberg and James Isaacs. And I said, okay, to do this, what are the skills I need? And they say, well, you need to have product management skills. I'm like, okay, so I'll write down product management, but how do you break down product management? Like, what are those skills? And so, well, you need to have spec products, and you need to understand what the support requirements would be, and you need to understand the engineering feasibility of it, and you need to understand, it was like, right, so.
So you were just kind of a vacuum of knowledge, and then you, so you were at Apple, and then you went into another Fujitsu.
Yes.
It was another kind of social, and this one is
worlds away. It was a virtual world.
Your future collaborator Peter Thiel, I think, called this 7 years or 8 years ahead of its time.
Well, it may even be much longer than that.
More than 10, 15 years.
We still don't have really interesting virtual worlds. It's still TBD,
okay.
right? Yeah. Well, I did that because it fit the how do we create a community and a society together. Community products, network products were interesting to me. The other thing I had realized when I was doing all the skills indexing is I thought that it was likely that in order to create the product I wanted, I would have to start a business. And so starting a business meant I would have to raise money from investors, venture capitalists. So I then went and studied, okay, what happens, what kinds of people do venture capitalists fund? And I was like, well, generally speaking, the ideal kind of target for venture capital financing is one business person, one tech person, two founders with a product that has a unique position in the market that can grow into that and has a competitive edge, that the founder is capable of doing that. I said, okay, well, I'll either have to be the tech person or the business person. And I was like, well, I'd rather actually be the business person than the tech person. How do I do that? Well, I need to have experience with a P&L. I need to have experience with kind of running a whole project. I need to have product experience. And so Fujitsu said, okay, well, you can do all that here. And so I took the job at Fujitsu in order to do that. Now, it also happened to be a virtual world, so I was interested in that project. Although I did actually tell them, which turned out to be true, is I thought that virtual worlds were too early. Like the likelihood that you could pull off the project was very low. But because picking up all of the experience was part of getting to building the product that I think I should be building, it was like, look, I'm willing to essentially work 80 hours a week really hard on this to pick up all these skills and try as best I can to make this work, but I'm not sure that the actual project will work.
Yeah, I mean, what's fascinating here is you were very deliberate at an early stage in your career of saying, I'm going to construct myself into, you didn't say, oh, I'm just a business person, I'm just not, it's like, hey, these are you decompose, what are the skills that make someone good at this? Yeah. And I'm going to get them, even if they're not where I naturally, in some of those dimensions. And I think the other interesting aspect, I think that there's no coincidence for what you do later, is when you thought about businesses, it seems like you didn't say like, okay, where can I eke out an extra $1 that the market hasn't fully adjusted yet. You're saying, what are interesting social dynamics, problems, ways of connecting human beings, and maybe a business falls out of that.
Yes, that's exactly right. And so, because part of the thing is if you say, well, public intellectual, right? So one thing you could be doing is writing essays and trying to influence people and think about how to be different as individuals or as a society, and what to aspire to be. But it was like, well, and so is that you're creating software as a medium that people live in, right? So, it's kind of the medium is the message in the classic McLuhan, but literally it's like the medium changes the way that our identities, how we connect with people, who are our friends, who we play with, who we go to school with, who we work with, how we work, how we learn, right? Things that you guys do, right? And so given that, I wanted to play in the construction of that medium in a way that led both the individuals and the group, the society, the community, to both be a lot better. And that was the thing that I was interested in. And it didn't have to be, this is one of the reasons why, after Social Net, I was willing to kind of, join PayPal full time. When the company was founded, I was on the board. But I was like, when I was thinking about going and starting that company, Peter said, no, come join us. And I was like, great. It doesn't have to be my idea. It just has to be, that's the landscape that I wanted to play in.
Right, and PayPal has that same other, it's something that could change how people interact and transact. And
well, so the basic, there were kind of two ideas on PayPal. One of them was, but one of them was enable anyone to be a merchant. And I know to many of the students, anyone being a merchant sounds, oh, what is that? It's like, well, if everyone can essentially, you decide that I'm going to be an artist, I'm going to sell my art. Well, I can sell my art with PayPal, using eBay and PayPal together, for example. Or, I'm going to open up a lemonade stand, right? Well, I can now accept electronic payments. I can accept credit cards doing that and so forth. And that was kind of the enabling anyone to sort of be entrepreneurial and set up a business was kind of the key thing that was part of the baseline vision in PayPal. And then the second one was to create a new currency, which PayPal obviously didn't do. We transacted in national currencies. Although that's not one of the reasons I'm now an investor in two different Bitcoin projects.
And there's PayPal obviously, huge success and continues to be so, but there's something interesting about PayPal, because there's Elon Musk, there's Peter Thiel, you guys are hanging out. What was it? How much did that?
We didn't think of it as hanging out. But yes.
Yeah, we're working hard and trying to establish a new global currency, whatever it might have been.
Yes. That was the T-shirt, by the way. New global currency.
New global, very good. I'd like to get one of those.
Yes.
But was there something about the three? And there's kind of famously the PayPal Mafia, and it wasn't just the three of us. There's a whole group of folks who kind of graduated from PayPal, and then went on to do, other epic things. Was there something special about the conversations that y'all had, the way that y'all kind of pushed each other? Or?
Well, and the other person added that is Max Levchin. If you do that whole list, because Max and Peter were the first two founders of PayPal. And then we merged with X.com, which Elon was the founder of, and then the three were the founders of the new PayPal. And the thing that was unique about the PayPal crew is typically when people start companies, they go, oh, I need to get people with a lot of experience at doing just this job. Like you have a lot of experience coding, you have a lot of experience running the data center, you have a lot of experience marketing, you have a lot of experience selling. PayPal opted for very high talent young people with the expectation that the high talent young people would learn the jobs. So as opposed to hiring someone who's like, well, you've had a ton of experience doing this exact job, we said, we're going to hire someone we think is a very fast learner, and we're going to trust that they're going to learn the job really fast. And we'll hire some experienced people too, but a huge predilection of that. And so part of the reason why the PayPal folks all went off and were A, entrepreneurial, B, went off and did stuff, is you had a whole bunch of high talent young people that had experience with entrepreneurship, experience young. The PayPal story was like basically kind of, let's call it 4 years from beginning to sale. So everyone was like, well, I gotta go do something, right? And so then everyone else started running off and doing all the different things that they were interested in doing. And I went off to found LinkedIn. Peter started a hedge fund. He'd done a hedge fund before, but a much bigger one. Elon went off to do SpaceX and Tesla. Max founded an incubator, then did Slide, and is now doing the incubator with another company, Affirm now. And that's because we were all like, this is a game that we got experienced in, that we like. And then the quote unquote, I don't really like the term PayPal Mafia, although it's entertaining because kind of, Mafia is not the organization you aspire to be. Network. I like PayPal Network.
Network, very good.
Right.
Yes.
But we also, the thing that was also very helpful then is in 2002 was when PayPal was sold to eBay. And a lot of great projects and great entrepreneurial companies get started during actually downturns. And we were all very fortunate that we all got free to do our next projects during a downturn, because it meant the capital we gotten from PayPal, we could use that. Because when lots and lots of companies are starting, it's very hard to break through the noise. In a downturn, there's few companies, and so it's more, you have a longer runway. If you can get the financing for it, you can be one of the interesting projects, you can aggregate talent for it. And we were all very interested in the consumer internet. And so that's part of the reason why the PayPal Mafia, not all interested, although Elon went and did hard science projects. Yeah. Great, he's an awesome example for that. But that's part of the reason why it was an unusual large number of people who went and founded interesting companies from that.
And when you were, as you say, free, and it's 2002, it's the downturn, you feel empowered. I mean, were you just kind of like, I'm going to start a new thing? What do I start? How did LinkedIn come to you, and what form did it come to you?
So, in August of 2000, PayPal burned $12 million in 1 month, had an exponentiating cost curve, and had no revenue. So we could chart the hour in which this company, which I think at the time had raised $168 million of capital, would be a smoking hole in the ground. Right? So Peter, Max, and another of the kind of junior co-founders of PayPal, Luke Nozick, and I went to an offsite where in my grandparents' place in Gualala, which is in Northern California. And we did 3 days. And the first day was, what should we do with PayPal? And we decided that like being a master merchant, which is what PayPal is today, which takes fees for accepting electronic payments, credit card payments in particular, that was the path we're going to do. And we had a lot of discussion, by the way, of Star Wars and the Death Star, because it was like we had one swoop into the trench, and we're going to have one shot at this. Right?
Someone had to use the Force.
Yes, there was a lot of discussion of use the Force, Peter. Yes. And so the second day, we presented the ideas that we'd had to each other in terms of the kinds of things that we would also, if PayPal didn't work, what else we might do. And so I had said a little bit about what I thought about, well, everyone's going to have a public professional identity, and that'll be useful to their career and their jobs, and it'll help them invest in themselves and that sort of thing. And I had some of the components, not all of the components, but like I had that as kind of an idea. And then the third day we went hiking. We took a day, because we knew that was going to be our last day off for a while, right? And so then the first idea worked. So PayPal, still master merchant, and an awesome company. And then what happened is I helped sell PayPal to eBay. And then in October, I was planning on taking a year off, because startups are really intense, right? They tend to be what are you doing at Saturday at 7 p.m.? You're working on your startup. What are you doing at Sunday at 10 a.m.? You're working on your startup. Because the metaphor I use for startups is in a startup, you're throwing yourself off a cliff and you're assembling an airplane on the way down.
Which is not easy to do for anyone who hasn't tried.
Yes, yeah, not recommended, other than in the metaphorical but kind of business context. And the reason for that is that the startup, by definition, when you start it, is dead. It doesn't have a business model. It doesn't have customers. So the inertial state is dead. And so you get a thermal draft by financing. You put a little bit of money, you get a little further away from the ground. You get a little bit more, you get a little further away from the ground. But until you create a plane, right, you actually do not have a going concern. And by definition, you're going to crash. And so that's really intense. And so after having done that, first at SocialNet, then at PayPal, I was like, I'm going to take time off. And so I actually started it by going and spending 2 weeks with a friend of mine, Ned Hoyt, in Australia. And then what I realized is that the Silicon Valley had gone crazy, that they all thought the consumer internet was over, that Amazon, Google, eBay, PayPal, Yahoo, these was it. That's the whole consumer internet. The consumer internet game is played. These are the big companies. Now we're looking at other things. And so they went to enterprise software and clean tech. And I was like, no, the consumer internet is actually, in fact, just starting. Because one of the things, the problems that people have is they generally speaking, over-imagine change in the short term and under-imagine it in the long term. And they hadn't realized that all of these different ideas that people have, they're still building towards them, and that there was a great future possibility for what the consumer internet could do. And so I said, all right, I'll have to kind of just take the 2 weeks as a break, not as a year, and I have to get back and I have to start playing in the consumer internet. And actually, I should found a company and I should be investing. And so I spent about 8 weeks thinking about different ideas about what I could do, and I ultimately concluded LinkedIn was still the best idea of the ideas that I had. And then I'd been talking to a bunch of friends about these ideas, and so Jean-Luc Vaillant and Alan Blue and Constantine Guerrica and Eric Lee, we all kind of came together and did LinkedIn. And then I also decided to invest, because one of the problems with being a startup entrepreneur is it's like you're putting all of your eggs in this one basket. And the challenge is that you roll the dice and that may work or may not work. And so how do you have a little bit more diversity? It was like, well, I have a little bit of money. I was sure the consumer internet would do well. And so I started investing in the interesting companies in the consumer internet. Both the investments and LinkedIn obviously, worked out okay.
Yeah. And when in that kind of forming process, I mean, in hindsight, it looks like, oh, LinkedIn obviously is going to be hugely. I mean, were there moments where you're like, what am I doing? This is not going to work. This is like a.
There are always those moments in this kind of hard work. One of the pieces of advice that I give entrepreneurs is 98%, like almost 100, almost all startups go through what I call a valley of the shadow moment. PayPal did that. You burned $12 million in 1 month. You spent, what I told Peter Thiel is that if we had stood on the roof throwing wads, like the roof here, throwing wads of $100 bills over the side, we would not have spent money faster than we were spending it, right? So, because $12 million is a lot of money, right? And so that's a valley of the shadow moment. You're actually, in fact, going, was this a good idea? Did we make the right choices? Right? Is this going to work? And it was absolutely unclear. And so all startups have that. And so, you had that multiple points along with LinkedIn. You had that with, when we launched LinkedIn, we hoped it would just work. And we launched LinkedIn, and in the first, say, 8 weeks, the number of people that were signing up for the service were about 2,000 people per week. Now, roughly speaking, if you think 2,000 people per week, we probably could have gotten that many signups if what we'd done is taken a phone book and had everyone in the company just calling people saying, please sign up, please sign up, please sign up. That was about the rate. That's not going to work. That's death. And so we knew we had to solve a growth problem. We had to get enough people inviting and getting people into LinkedIn. And so that's what we worked on for basically a year in order to make that work. And if that didn't work, value of LinkedIn, zero. Right? Like just the whole thing goes to zero. There's nothing else. Then you got another problem. You say, okay, well, we got people signing up in an irrelevant set of numbers that was beginning to compound and grow. But okay, if we don't have a revenue stream, then we also value zero because eventually you run out of money, you can't raise any more capital, you're gone. So we first launched job listings. Now we knew that job listings was unlikely to be the thing that would be the big revenue model for LinkedIn because we thought it was too difficult to grow a marketplace. Marketplaces are a really interesting business, eBay, Airbnb, but they're very difficult to grow. And we thought that would be difficult. But most of the question that people had around LinkedIn then was, what do you do with it? Like, okay, I signed up, I'm not sure what to do. And we knew that getting people to understand that it could be used for finding a job or recruiting was one of the things we want to do. So we started with job listings. And it had exactly the impact that we kind of to some degree both hoped and feared it would have, which is, oh, we know how to use LinkedIn now, but not a lot of people are buying job listings. So then we went to subscriptions and ads, and those got us to profitability. And that was when we went, okay, now I know that I have a company that can build to something very large. And that was, I think, 2005, right? So this all started in kind of late 2002. We incorporated in early 2003. So more or less, that was 2 years where you'd say of any particular week, right now, if you were to look at the data of what's happening, if you were to just say, take a look at the company as it is right now, what happens? And the answer is, the company doesn't exist.
Yeah.
Right? You're building towards this future that you see. And that's all through a valley of the shadow.
Yeah, I think that's an important point. In hindsight, everyone said, oh, yeah, it's LinkedIn and Google and all this, but they all went through this phase of like, what are we doing? Is this going to survive? And is this going to...
2/3 of my friends, when I talked to them about the LinkedIn idea, thought I was crazy.
Yeah.
Which, by the way, is frequently a good sign.
Right.
Because to do a really interesting startup, you have to be contrarian and right. Yeah. So if everyone says, oh, that's a great idea, right? Like, for example, when you were going around early in the Khan Academy, people were like, no, that's not going to work.
Yes,
no, you shouldn't do that. That's what happened.
I had one moment where we were at a dinner party, and they said, what do you do for a living? And I was like, I make YouTube videos. And I heard them say as they were walking, good thing his wife's a doctor. Boy, that was just very... made me feel small.
Yes, but you have to work through that.
And so if we fast forward to today, LinkedIn obviously, what's the number? How many?
Oh, I don't remember what our public number is. It's over 300 million people.
300 million, a chunk of humanity is using this. What is, if Reid of 2002 saw this organization, what would he be thinking? Is it what he dreamt of? Is it beyond what he dreamt of? And where do you think this is going to go?
So one thing that's unusual, most consumer internet startups don't actually have a vision from the very beginning that they stick to. They pivot a lot. They change a lot. LinkedIn was actually more or less, there are things that have surprised us and the things we've learned, but more or less we thought everyone's going to have a public professional identity. That identity is like a resume or a CV. They're going to have a network of people that they trust. And then there's going to be a set of applications built on that identity and network that will help them with their work. Key initial things will help find a job, or help find an expert, or help find a connection to a company, or help recruit somebody. But as you get larger, you also get to the, well, how do I solve this problem? Who else is expert? Within my company, outside my company. How do I find a person to found a company with? How do I find a source in a company for a story that I'm writing as a journalist? How do I find an expert to advise me on an investment? How do I figure out which skills are the interesting skills for me to pick up if I wanted to get a first job out of college? All of these things we knew from 2003 would be the kinds of things that would be coming out of it, because it's been a very consistent vision about let's build to the place where for every individual, we are the best thing to help them with their career, which includes their daily work. And that's more or less been on target. Now, we didn't know, would we get to revenue in time? You know, we didn't know this would be the exact revenue source. We had a whole raft of ideas. We didn't know, like for example, probably we thought that people would be using the group's product more for like web developers or art or graphic designers getting together and helping each other. They are using it. We thought they'd be using it more. They're probably using it less than thought. There are unexpected uses. Like for example, we didn't realize that we would end up building essentially a skills index because we could do big data analytics on all the things and say, here's a list of all the human skills, right? You know, those sorts of things. Like, so, you know, there's discovery, but the direction and the true north has been actually unusually constant for what happens for most consumer internet companies.
So what's I mean, you know, LinkedIn, you're still very active in LinkedIn, but you're also a partner at Greylock.
Yep.
So you're a very active venture capitalist. And you know, we were just talking. You're doing a million other things. You're getting involved in philanthropy and the community and all of this. You know, where, you know, in the spirit of all of what we've talked about, kind of, you know, you're still a young guy. You know, where do you see all of this going for yourself?
I feel older, but yes.
Yes.
Well, so my mission is how do I help? It's the public intellectual mission. It's how do I help society be better? If it's starting and I won't start another company, but it's like LinkedIn, helping people discover what they should be when they grow up, what skills would be helpful for them getting a job, how they control their own economic destiny. Great. And there's a bunch of stuff we do specifically also to help veterans and students and everything else within LinkedIn as part of, I think, the modern mission for good companies is to have things that you do as part of your mission that aren't just pure profit incentive. It's not to say you're not always paying attention to revenue, but things that you are, that are aligned with your mission, that are part of the right way to help create a better society. Greylock, I'm an investor, a venture capitalist. I generally invest in marketplaces and networks. So I'm an investor in Airbnb and, you know, Bitcoin companies and other things. Zappo is one of the ones. I serve on a bunch of nonprofit boards, Kiva, which is a marketplace for microfinance, and Do Something, which is the largest teen philanthropic community. And then I do writings. So I've wrote a book called The Startup Review with Ben Kasnoka, and then also with Ben and Chris Shea, this book called The Alliance. And it's how, you know, the right life strategy is to think of yourself as the entrepreneur of your own life, and what are the skills for that. So the Startup Review is kind of take all of the concepts that I've learned about entrepreneurship and I help other entrepreneurs with and distill it to what an individual's life should be. And then, you know, I respond to phone calls for people and projects that I'm trying to help. So it's a very diverse life.
Yes, and no one could be better to talk about the Startup Review. I mean, it's based on our conversation. You are amazingly deliberate in your path. You know, just final question. We always ask this at Khan Academy, but also for, you know, just even the users of Khan Academy. You know, what advice do you have for us as an organization and for anyone else out there?
Well, I mean, you're already doing a lot of amazing things. How do you use technology to scale so that you can possibly help, you know, tens and hundreds of millions of people take control of their own learning? You help cross the digital divide in social justice because you're available to anybody who has an internet connection. You're focused on mobile, so you have a mobile app because I've used it.
It's
right.
about to get much better.
Oh, excellent.
You're working on it.
Yes. It's one of the things I travel with because actually learning new things is always fun. I'd say, you know, sustainability in terms of what is creation of a business model is one of the things to think about. Not to be, you know, to make tons and tons of money, but just to be able to keep reinvesting. Because technology organizations, one of the things people don't understand about them is it takes a bunch of investment every year, and so a business model is helpful to that. And obviously, a business model that works and aligns with the organization would be something I would think would be on the drawing board. You probably have stuff you're already thinking about. You know, and actually, you might. I don't think you guys do a lot of social media stunts. You might do that to get more attention, right? So do a little bit more of kind of classes and lectures on, for example, things that are current, like where the current zeitgeist of people paying attention.
Yes.
So like, what is Ebola?
Yes,
right?
we have one actually.
Oh,
for that. But yeah, we should do more.
But do more of that, and do that along aligns with what's currently happening, because you'll get attention on that, right? As that sort of thing. And so it could be even little micro lessons or classes.
Yeah.
That would be something I would think about doing. And you may be doing some of it already.
No. The more ideas, the better.
And I'll give it a little bit more thought too.
Yeah, awesome. Well, on behalf of everyone here, just want to really thank you for being here.
My pleasure, and thank you for coming. I hope that was even vaguely interesting.